time's over.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Smash podcast. Name pending currently. My name is Miles, or Emdy, and I am here with Andrew, or Senn. And we are going to be talking today about bracket prep at tournaments, majors, regionals, tournaments of scale. But before we get started on our topic for today, just thought it would be good to take a second to introduce ourselves for those who may not be familiar with one or both of us. My name is Miles, tag MD, of course, and I've been a Smash enthusiast for 5 years now. Been playing the game for a very long time and been coaching almost just as long. I've been one of the better players in my region of Missouri for a few years now, and I am very excited to talk to you guys and Andrew about getting better in Smash Bros. Andrew?
Alright, I am Andrew. My tag is Senn, S-E-N-N, not the NES player. I am also, similarly to Miles, usually ranked around the top of my state in North Carolina. I've been doing the Smash Bros. Nerd stuff for like 6 years, something like that, and have a lot of experience coaching, local players from North Carolina, and just kind of thinking about the game, really getting into it. Thought it'd be fun to share a lot of our thoughts on how to do things like today's topic, which is tournament prep.
Right, and as far as tournament prep goes, just jumping into it, wanted to start by asking you specifically how seriously you take prepping for any given bracket relative to just your normal body of work. So what I mean by that is how much additional emphasis you put on preparing for a specific tournament, a specific bracket, a specific player, as opposed to your normal training and practice regimen that you engage in.
Okay, so this is one of those things where it tends to vary, but to generalize, whenever there's like a major or like a big regional coming up, an event where there's a lot of talent that I don't necessarily get to play against super often, my seed is going lower and lower, that kind of thing. I want to say that the main thing that everyone does, myself included, is we always take a peek at our brackets. We find out the most important high seeds in our pool who are projected to play. You look at your losers path, and the first thing I like to think about is just matchups. Am I familiar with these things? Do I need a checkup at all first? That's like the first question, is just like rounding it up. What do I need to worry about firsthand? And I feel like a lot of the time for majors, I will super focus on I have this path to make it into top 64, 48, whatever, and I'll be the 5th seed. I gotta play the 4th seed into the 1st seed to make it out, and I will kind of pigeonhole myself into practicing this one specific matchup or this other specific matchup, which can be kind of bad sometimes. Okay, I had to beat Shu at Let's Make Moves Miami. That was the player I had to beat to make it the next big seed and get on my way out of pools. So I'm focusing on preparing for this player. She plays Zero Suit, so of course the first thing I'm thinking about is okay, what Zero Suits can I play in Ryuga Court or whatever? Can I watch this matchup played at a higher level than I have done before? Looking up Void versus Mars, seeing if there's any reps from other players, because you don't want to pigeonhole into just one style. You don't want to just watch one player. And also, I think it's important to watch replays of the player you have to play against specifically. I think that's something I could do a lot more. I don't normally have as much faith in watching a player play and being okay, well, now I got to download. It's never worked as simply like that for me. But I can actually speak from secondhand experience when we were going to, I want to say it was CEO 2022, my friend Nick Spandex, he's a raw player from North Carolina, he had to play Uncivil Ninja, and at the time, this guy was just kind of out of his reach. I don't think anybody expected Nick to do anything to Uncivil Ninja, but he like actually prepared. He was watching his VODs. I remember being in the hotel. It's the night before, and Nick is watching like his 8th Uncivil Ninja replay, and he is just studied in. He's got a game plan. He's ready. And then the next day they play, and it's like the cleanest 2-0 I've ever seen. I was just like amazed. I remember that was the moment where I like started to appreciate prep, like honestly for the first time. And that's why I was like, okay, maybe there is more to this kind of thing, and I need to get a little bit deeper into it. Because beforehand, it was just kind of like I look at my bracket path, zero suit. Okay, let me find a zero suit to play for 2 hours the night before, or something like that. But it really does do you wonders. It goes a long way. Because there's so many variables in this game, it's kind of hard to stay consistent. You're going to have to dip your toes into the water when you play these people. You can't just play perfectly. That doesn't exist. You can't just play super safe or whatever the whole time. You're going to have to take risks, and it's wonderful to have some kind of guide to hold your hand and be like, okay, this is where we should look first. This is how I want to fill this opponent out, whether it's based on their replays, things that you know about the matchup, whatever favors you as a player and what you're more comfortable and confident in understanding. And honestly, I am just now getting super into that kind of thing, because beforehand I was a shallow believer. It wasn't as big to me.
Sure. And something that you touched on there, you spoke about how like you sort of saw it firsthand and you realized it's like, oh, there might actually be something to this. And I think a lot of us at the higher levels of play have had that like gotcha moment where you realize you're like, oh, this actually does something. Because I think a lot of people go into bracket prep sort of not really with an idea of what they're trying to get from it, if that makes sense. And so they'll watch VODs sort of aimlessly. They'll do what you said of watching other reps of the top level players of their characters play the matchups. They'll watch, and that's about where it starts and ends, is just watching it beforehand, and then they sit down and they play and they lose regardless. You're like, prep is pointless. For me, I had that realization a few years ago. I remember there's this event in town that had a very large pop bonus for no reason. And that sort of thing happens all the time in small regions where just someone throws $1,000 at something for no reason. And I remember thinking like, okay, I really want to do well at this tournament, not just for the sake of doing well at it, but, you know, there's the monetary incentive for it. And I was like, how do I take my preparation for that to the next step beyond what I'd already been normally doing, which is, you know, just sort of haphazardly watching a VOD or two, playing the match the night before with a random player, etc. And so I did that, and I took it seriously. So I knew that the players coming to the event that I was legitimately concerned with losing to were Atada, the Nest player, Tony Z Tank, the Sonic player, and Nico, the Shulk player. And going in, I had never seen any of these players play seriously before. And when I say seriously, I mean actually evaluating what's going on in front of me instead of mindlessly watching the game. And I created a document and wrote a few pages on each of these players, and I went into it with the perspective of the VODs being like textbooks more so than like just videos. And what I mean by that was I asked questions going in, looking at these VODs, and tried answering them to the best of my ability. So I had things that I was already looking for going into the VODs that I was looking for answers to before watching them, so I'm not just opening it and hoping that just like looking at it, something will click and there will just magically be a conducive game plan there, because that's obviously not how it works. But I think a lot of players don't know or understand that. And so when I was really giving it my all, putting all my prep work into it, I noted down some usable, tangible information that would aid me in winning the set. So much less abstract things than noting their play styles or vaguely what their objectives are, but more so like literally finding answers in specific circumstances. So how are they disengaging when they're in scrambles with someone? How are they leaving shield? When are they shielding, etc. And
Right.
just documenting all this tangible, applicable information is really the biggest key, I think, for a lot of people. And when I did that, I ended up getting second at that tournament, and that was pretty substantial for me because I was expected to lose to all of the players there. And I came home that night, and I was like, wow, I am really glad that I took the time, because I think if I went in blindfolded, then I really wouldn't have had a chance. And I used the word blindfolded very intentionally, because I remember a Sonic's tweet from a long time ago that sort of put me on to the idea of doing it, where he tweeted that he couldn't believe that half the top players in this game go into their brackets blindfolded and just hope that they win. And that it really rings true. There's no reason not to set yourself up to succeed the best that you can with the resources given to you. But as I said, I really do feel like it is a case of most people not really understanding how to prep effectively. And so that's really what I was hoping to touch on here. And so I wanted to ask you what you felt that you're specifically looking for when you're going into your prep, when you dive into it now.
Yeah, so one of those things for me, and I think for most people, is that condensing the information you take from a VOD when you do watch it into something tangible that you can actually use can be difficult, because not everybody thinks about the game the same way. That's like the big one, is that people have just different processes in which they view the game in. And even then, when you do kind of know how to write for yourself, it can be difficult to condense it in a manner of where you're like able to actually take in that information and then still play the game. You're not like trying to remember a textbook's worth of stuff. You're not trying to remember paragraphs and paragraphs of this detailed thing. It would be wonderful to understand everything to such a degree, but a lot of the times when you're prepping for things, you need to focus on your bullet points, the most important things in a matchup, your weaker areas, the things you need to cover. And for me, I should also mention that this is one of those things that I've been rounding out for quite some time. I've never been super good about picking out the best things. A lot of the times when I take notes on players or matchups or something like that, it actually ends up being this long mess of scrambled like everything everywhere. And then from that, I can try to condense it down to a couple things. I'm personally very good with practicing the things themselves, like getting in the motions of it. I am a doer, so I learn best through like acting and actually like trying it. So I'll give myself this long-winded plan because I kind of struggle to take it down and specify it through just thinking about it. But then for me, I know that works for me is just practicing it. If I have this plan against this zero suit, I'm going to see all of these things. I'm going to try and test them out. I'm going to gauge what do I think is the most important part of this. Where are there big question marks? What do I need to clean up effectively? And it makes it a lot easier after I practice it. And I've done this before. I remember Vivid, aka Jenna Ortega, aka Kid from Popeyes, aka Lewis, aka 30 other tags.
Man of many names.
Man of many names. Toon Link from Georgia, consistently PR'd. He's a really good friend of mine. I remember I wanted to make my Toon Link notes, largely for him, but I had this long list of shit, and he had seen it. And I just didn't know what to do with it. And I remember one day we just played for like 2 hours. And by the end of it, I had condensed it all to like a seventh of its original size. And I was really happy with what it looked like. I showed Lewis and I was like, wow. He was on the same page. Like, dang, that's pretty good. Uh, and it's like to this day, despite maybe being like my 50th most played matchup, it's Sheik Toon Link. It's one of my more comfortable ones. It's one of the ones that I would rather be given in a bracket because I feel like I understand to a comfortable degree all of the most important parts about Toon Link and what I really need to know about it. That effort when it's put there goes a long way, even if it's a little hard to get there sometimes. And I think that that's kind of the struggle for most people. And again, like myself, and it's not even the entirety of prepping for somebody. We're just talking about matchups and stuff like that right now. We haven't even gotten into like the mentality surrounding approaching tournaments like this. That can be a real doozy, like a big problem for most people. And again, myself included, I think we have to kind of fail before we can succeed in that kind of thing. You just kind of fuck around and find out. Before I keep going on any further, I'll let you like try to talk about that.
Well, I agree. I agree definitely with what you're saying. Is that it is a matter of figuring out what works for you, and figuring out what works with you really requires knowing yourself, not just as a player, but just the way that you learn. And you really do have to fail a lot to be able to derive systems that work for you. And that's not just exclusive to prep. It really applies to anything in Smash. And the unfortunate nature of brackets, bracket prep in particular, is because we both of us are going to DreamHack this weekend. And my final bracket, we're recording this on a Wednesday at 11 p.m. my time. And I will sit down to play singles Saturday. And my final bracket went up only hours ago. And so that's part of why bracket prep in particular requires such a deep understanding of how to do it efficiently, because you're given so little time inherently. Like you were talking about in your example with Vivid, where you had, these long-winded, rambly, like massive and excessive amounts of notes to the point where they wouldn't be applicable. You made them functional and practical by sitting down and playing against your opponent that the notes are for hours. And in reality, that's just not feasible most of the time for most people. And so a lot of bracket prep, weirdly, has nothing to do with any given bracket. It is much more so the amalgamate result of having tried and done it a million times, and you figure out what information is actually usable for you and how to derive that from your prep systems, be it VOD review, practicing the match with the rep, etc.
Yeah, for sure. It's you just gotta fall over sometimes. You gotta experiment. Getting into your groove is one of the most difficult things, and it can be super ambiguous. And another reason that I think people can even get deterred from prepping properly for the in the first place is that when you don't know how to do this kind of thing, and I'm not even getting into the semantics, like you said, of how little prep time you'll actually get, especially for things like regionals, which tend to seed things like 2 days before the event, stuff like that.
Sometimes.
Yeah, it's just tough. You don't have the most time to properly prepare for your bracket, and it can be discouraging when you do take a shot at it or you do plan for this thing. You don't really know how to do it. You're like my example earlier, you just are all over the place. You got notes everywhere, and it's like, is this making a difference? What am I doing here? And you kind of, since you have to fail and learn what works with you, you're not given that encouragement of like, oh, this is actually good, because everything is backed up by placements or results that you're not necessarily satisfied with. It takes some discipline to be able to like teach yourself and keep teaching yourself. And one of the hardest parts surrounding like preparing for a tournament and being in control of like yourself and how you're viewing things, how you're taking information in, how you're preparing, is a mentality that goes towards competing in the tournament itself. Um, this is one of the most complicated things, if not the most complicated thing in competing, to me, anyways. I think that it's a make or break for everyone ever. I think it's one of the biggest decider of how well you can perform at any given event is what is going on in your head the day of the event. And it's not an easy thing to be on top of because conditions change. The way that you feel will change. The quality of your play and execution will change. Your brackets will change. There's so many factors that are not going to be stagnant, and you have to prepare for so much that it's unreasonable. So instead, you're like, okay, well, I need this way to condense everything and have this plan where I will just focus on positivity, playing this way to get this result and see how it comes. You kind of have to pigeonhole yourself in some kind of direction and test the waters at this tournament that you're probably spending money and time to go to. Usually in the tournaments we're talking about, like being majors or regionals, it's not as practical to just slide on over to like a local. So there's so many things that are putting pressure on you to perform, and then even while you're doing that, you're going to this tournament and you have to like put your life on the line and try something to figure yourself out, and then you get smacked up. You like lose, something doesn't make sense, and it's like the process is just discouraging. You have to try it all over again. It can be really daunting to see the amount of effort it takes, and like finding a needle in a haystack, knowing what you should do. Seems like it might be an impossibility sometimes. Like these other people can do it and I can't. I'm just not meant to do it like that. I can't do it like that, so maybe I can't do it at all. It's not the greatest like feedback loop.
Right, and I absolutely agree with that. There's the element of, like you said, the inadequacy, the feelings like that you just are not made to be doing that in that moment. Which is a very natural part of anyone for competing, and it's very easy to look at someone and see them succeed and succeed regularly and look at it and be like, I can't possibly understand how that could be me. It's very difficult to envision that being yourself, especially when the nature of the world is that people learn in different ways, and different learning mindsets are just naturally more adapted to environments of competition. And so what it seems like is that these people who do it on the regular, people like Spargo and Sonics, and they go and win everything with ease, it can feel completely unattainable because they have talent and I don't have talent.
Talent.
The
Right.
the construct of talent, right? And really, when people, I hate so much when that stupid discourse about talent versus hard work rolls around, and I'm sure that you do too, because really talent, framing it like that is a total misunderstanding of how the human psyche works relative to playing the game. Some of the best Smash players that I have ever met in my entire life are horribly inarticulate. They're unable to explain what they do, why it works. And people see that and attribute it to this concept of talent, that they were just simply born as god gamers, when it couldn't be further from the truth. And circling back to what we were talking about, it's very easy to feel like you're outworking a talented individual and then not perform anywhere near where they are, and see that and be like, okay, I wasn't made for this, it's done. When in reality, like, human nature is to push past or the I don't exactly know how to phrase what I'm trying to say, but nature of competition is at odds with human nature, and to really see the fruits of your labor, you have to defy human nature inherently, and fight along a lot of the things that are part of our nature, like envy or apathy to it, and understand that those feelings of inadequacy are ultimately irrelevant to anything that has to do with getting better and performing on the day of a bracket. And so, tying this back into what we're talking about with prep, there's so many things to prepare for that it can feel impossible or daunting. And while a lot of us are dealing with similar circumstances, no one's are really the same. I know that Christian, or Peanut, is probably more the embodiment of what we call a hard worker as opposed to a talented player. He is the most religious bracket prepper on the face of the earth. I remember at Riptide, he was talking to me. He said that he had been up all night studying his top 32 bracket the day before top 32 started at the Riptide that he got second at. And I was like, that is insane. How can you bring yourself to sit in front of a laptop for 6 hours beforehand, before you're playing your bracket, knowing that you have to sleep and wake up the next day and go down there and play it? Like, I don't understand how anyone could have the patience to do that. And Pete just told me that he wanted to win really bad. And so that's sort of what it comes back around to, is much less so any inherent idea of talent, and more so willingness to push through anything like that and do what it takes to win. And preparation is a big part of that for a lot of people. And obviously Peanut is the embodiment of being prepared. And not everyone is feasibly going to be able to prepare in the way that he is. But he really is just such a great example of how, while you can't literally prepare for everything, you can come pretty goddamn close.
I think on that topic, Christian, being the way that he is, being able to really just get into studying, preparing for a tournament, devoting yourself to it. I think being able to achieve something like that is another part of being able to really articulate and understand your own motivations, like with the game, and being able to separate that from the comparisons that are usually clouded by talent and your perception of the people around you and yourself. And again, like we were mentioning earlier, those failed attempts or these difficult, messy attempts to prepare for tournaments and really understand how you're supposed to work, it piles up and you'll get distracted. You'll find all these kind of ambiguous ways to tell yourself that you're not capable of preparing for something. Again, talent's a great example, where most of the time people throw out the word not knowing what they're actually even saying with it. It's just kind of like a catch-all term half the time. And I think that with a player like Christian, I obviously can't tell you everything about him or what goes into his brain to make him be the way that he is, but he understands that for him, he is giving himself the best shot of winning and performing by doing the work. And he knows how he likes to work. He's done this for several years. He's tried it and failed many times, and he's going to continue doing the same thing. It's the accumulation of everything that leads to the you that is you on that day. And when you focus on these negative comparisons and reasons why you can't do something, or why it won't be as profitable for you as it would be for someone else who is talented, it's just time and energy taken away from the work you could be doing. And even more importantly to me, it's something that's going to pop up in the back of your head. To tie this into this whole mentality thing, which is so hard to get a real grasp on, uh, when you are playing a set, there's this high pressure, you want to win it, and your consciousness starts fading away from the things happening in the game. You start having that inner dialogue, and you start thinking about problem solving and like what's in front of you, like how do I deal with this? Anxiety kind of fills your brain, uh, and that kind of thing is happening. You don't have that confidence boost to give yourself of like, oh, I did study for this, I did prepare for this. You don't have anything to hold on to. You're left with yourself in that moment, playing against your opponent, and that's all you got. Uh, and that's why it is super important that before a tournament, you know how to stabilize yourself somewhat. And people have different ways of doing this too. I think that being stable all the time is impossible. The nature of improving in general is kind of ups and downs. You're going to have questions and anxiety surrounding the game. That's completely normal. But it's tournament time. You got a tournament this weekend. You have these opponents that you have to play. You got to be ready for it. So now it's time to kick into gear. What do you do about it? What are you supposed to do to calm your mind and make it to where you are putting your best effort to perform and learn from the tournament that you're about to go to? And again, I don't think there's a static answer for this. Unfortunately, it's always complicated. It's person to person, but everyone has their own ways of figuring it out. Something I really like to do, and I actually think that I learned this from a Coach Ramsey's video. I could be wrong, but when I'll go to tournaments and I'm wanting to do well, I'm stressed out, whatever. I'll find a quiet spot in the venue, usually the bathroom, especially at like a local, or even in the car on the way to the local or a regional or something, where I can talk to myself and kind of assess, what am I feeling? What am I scared of? What do I want to do? Why do I want to do it? And just that simple, basic self-conversation goes a long way, because what happens is when you're playing in the bracket and these anxieties fill up and you see this thing that you're not as properly prepared for, you're not executing, your brain goes back to the end of that conversation that you've already had. You've already talked about this. You've already come to understand why you're scared of it. And you already understand that in the moment, all you can do is all you can do, and to take the best approach that you've learned how to take. So instead of being in this like confused state of mind where you're taken away from the game and having this like dialogue fighting between your inner selves, instead you skip right to the end of it. You understand the situation. You're like, okay, that's true, but this is what I got to do. And your brain is more capable of focusing on the game at hand. That's helped me a lot. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't solve everything. I don't suddenly know answers to things I didn't know before, but I'm able to give my focus to the things in the match that I do know how to do. And I'm playing at the best that I do know how to play at. And that's probably my favorite trick that I've learned to do for myself in terms of preparing myself mentally.
Sure. And the thing that you just touched on, where you're focusing on what you do know how to do, is like a big part of practicing mindfulness, and being aware of the circumstances that you do and don't have control over. And so going into a bracket, you don't really have any control over your opponents and what they're not only what they're doing in the game and what characters they're playing and how they're doing it, but just literally which opponents you'll be facing is mostly out of your control. What time you have to play, where you have to play, the temperature of the venue, things like that are...
Somebody just bumped into my chair.
Yeah, exactly. I remember at Rewired Fest, the lovely disaster that event was, we were playing all the setups for the whole event were on one of those portable like prop-up stages, and there was maybe 60, 70 people on one of those stages at the time, and as people were walking around, the whole stage is rumbling. And so we're sitting there playing. I'm playing my round 2, getting camped out by a Samus in an earthquake. And that is obviously not ideal, but developing a fixation on these things is really just giving your brain an out.
Yeah.
It helps give you a way, regardless of the validity of how much they affected your set or not. It's very important to try to put them out of your mind as much as possible, not just before and during, but after as well, because your brain, you really need to get comfortable with the idea of failing and almost seek failure, because that's the only real way that growth is coming from. As far as mitigating that, though, you do really have to put a lot of focus as far as your prep going into the event on the elements that you can control. At the regional I was at last weekend, Honeypot, the brackets were entirely round robin pools into a giant double elim bracket, and they reseeded the double elim bracket after we played the round robin pools to avoid conflicts out of round robin pools. So the tournament was reseeded twice. And in a context like that, I have really almost no ability to prepare for my bracket as far as my matchup or my opponent, beyond really concise and small scale preparation. And what I mean by that is that literally on the car ride to the venue, I am finding out what my top 64, top 96, whatever bracket is, and looking at my opponents on my phone screen in the passenger seat, and just taking the most immediately applicable notes that I can that don't require much practice. So, like I said, just looking. I remember my round one was Egaz out of pools, and I looked at his pools. I was like, okay, first off, I need to figure out what character he's going to go against me. And I concluded that he was going to play Aegis. And so I find VODs of his Aegis, and I just know really extremely simple habits, things that will give me any advantage whatsoever going into the bracket. So I'm noticing what his default option is off the ledge, out of low percent hit stun, out of shield. And by keeping it as simple like that, it still gives me an idea of what's going to happen when I sit down and play the set. I've watched him and got a feel for what's going to happen in front of me, and I know in basic reoccurring situations generally what he defaults to. And I remember one of the things that I picked up on going into it is every time that he's in some sort of a close quarters combat situation, he resets with full hops a lot, and I got a lot of hits on his full hops out of pressure doing that. And so while I don't know if that single individual adjustment was enough to win me the set or really change the direction that the set went, I could feel it immediately in front of me. And so the result of the set was totally disconnected from what, in my eyes, what looked like successful preparation in the circumstances. I was able to look at my opponent beforehand, find things, and then know them, and then apply them immediately. And in my mind, that's what successful preparation looks like. It ends there. And it's totally disconnected from the actual win or lose outcome. And I think that applies on a grander scale to the whole bracket. So I would not, you could ultra heavily prepare for a player that you really want to upset and then still get thrashed. And it's very easy for that to happen and to look at that and say, well, okay, never fucking doing that again because that was a waste of time. But it's just so totally invalid. And, failure is really only defined by giving up, I would say. And it should be your perception of if what you did was successful or benefiting you in the long run should be completely disconnected from a win or loss. And I think that is really where it begins and ends with a lot of people, is getting caught up in a tangible result, especially because that's sort of what we're all striving for as competitors is the best possible numerical result or the best big win that we get at our brackets. And I think it's a really a super shallow and easy thing to get caught up on, and we all have. So yeah, that's sort of my perspective on it, and how I really feel like it's important to find the smaller battles to win and be able to benchmark the success of your preparation completely separate from how it actually went.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you kind of need that positive outlook, that kind of perseverant outlook on things. It's about that those little victories, because you're not gonna, especially starting out, not gonna understand every part of you the best way that you learn and all of those things. But like you were saying, even if it didn't completely change the result of your set with EGAS, maybe that would have happened anyway. Who knows, right? It gave you a sense of confidence. It gave you a guide to hold your hand and be like, okay, well, this is how I want to start it. And then from there, your brain is already geared on the game that you're playing. You're already focused on this little matchup practice, this little plan that you made, regardless of how good it can be with the time you are given, how detailed or how practiced it is. It's a guideline, and it gets your brain focused on the game and makes it harder to be distracted by other things that you don't need on your mind. And that, I think, that is the biggest deal, the biggest benefit. It's really easy to, I mentioned much earlier that, I used to have this problem where I would just super pigeonhole prepare for the one guy I want to beat. And it's super easy to do that, get super focused on actually winning the set. And then if you don't do it, it feels like a complete waste of time. It feels like a failure. You're dejected. You still have loser's bracket, but you're not even thinking about that anymore. You have let your entire mentality, the soul of you that's left in the game, in the tournament, just faded away because you put all the weight on winning the set, on performing, and it slips away from you. Where a lot of the time, I think it is more helpful to, I don't want to call it just being positive, but just kind of like this general understanding of, you know what you're gonna know, you're gonna be as capable as you will be on the day of the tournament. New skills aren't going to pop up. You can't just press a win button and suddenly you'll play better now. There's no magic to happen. So the best outlook for me, in my opinion, is when I go to something like that, I give myself these little ideas to work with, these little rules. Don't do this here. This guy loves to jump in this spot. Very basic, general things. And then I let my experience guide me through the rest, and it gets your brain geared towards the game. This is something I've heard about for forever. I think I first learned about it through the buzz. It's just the most important part of getting rid of nerves, for example, which isn't even something we super touched on, but it comes from the same place of anxiety of what ifs and can I do it and I need to win. This results focused mentality where you're focused on the after fact of sets. But the real thing that you'd like to do is focus on these little game plans. It doesn't matter what they are. They're not going to be perfect. It's fine. Even if you don't properly understand how to best take information in, if you're focused on something in the game, it gets your game head geared towards it. You are playing near the best that you're going to be able to. You are focused on the game, and that's the goal that you want at the end of the day. That is, if there is a necessary step, a first step, a main ingredient to this kind of thing, that's what I would say it is you want your focus, your conscious mind, to be on the set that you're playing and not other things. Effectively preparing to crazy critical degrees when possible is wonderful. Like you mentioned, the Sonics tweet, it's crazy that top players would go into brackets blindfolded, just going in I'll play this guy. I'll probably win. I think I'm good at this matchup. Something like that. When you have the chance to prepare, the more work you do, the more confident and solid you're going to feel in it, the better your game plans will actually be. And obviously that pays off in its own way. But I do think that the most important thing is to get to a stable point in your mind where you can focus on the sets you're playing and not super worried about who you have to play if you lose, or if you can make top 32 at this event, place your seed, get an upset. Keep your mind on the game that you're here to play.
I totally agree with that, and there is something very much in line with that I have told a million people. I harp on it a lot. Um, when I'm helping someone the day of a tournament or whatever, they're asking me, how do I beat X, Y, whatever. I'll help them to the best of my ability, and then they'll say something along the lines of, thanks, I'm pretty nervous about it. And the moment I hear that, if someone is acknowledging their nerves, as opposed to pretending, acting stoically and pretending like they're going to go in and win and feigning confidence, I think that is actually a really good groundwork for practicing mindfulness effectively. And a lot of people really don't understand how important mindfulness is in a competition environment. I saw a sports psychologist for a few sessions, and that was one of the biggest things that he touched on with dealing with nerves and environments, is being more aware of the self. And so what does that look like? So one of the big things that comes with mindfulness is a feeling of groundedness. You need to be able to take a step back mentally and see yourself in the situation that you're in currently, so you can help acknowledge the thoughts of inadequacy or what ifs, the nerves that come along with things, and then let them pass. And one of the things that I tell people to do a lot of the times is to have sort of a default thought to come back to that is centered in gameplay specifically. I remember Morley at Riptide was talking to me about playing Zenodo, and he felt like he had a good chance at beating Zenodo, but he told me he was dealing with a lot of stuff outside of bracket and that he was all over the place and he wasn't really feeling, sort of up to competition. I was like, all of that right now is irrelevant to what's about to happen in the game. At the end of the day, you're going to sit down and you're going to play and you're going to win or lose. So you need to have something that you can immediately come back to in your mind when the time comes and you find yourself falling into those nervous thoughts, to help recenter. And what I told Morley, I was like, what do you think the most important thing is in your perspective in Snake versus Diddy Kong? And Morley told me, he was like, well, it's a really stage control oriented matchup. Like whoever has center stage is winning most of the time. And I said, okay, anytime that you find yourself having toxic, non-productive, non-tournament set related thoughts, especially centered around your mentality, bring yourself back to that. Just tell yourself, I need to hold center stage. I need to hold center stage. I need to play it for stage control. And even just having something as small as that is enough to sort of pull you back in to the set that you're playing right now. And that can go a really long way in keeping you from spiraling into those thoughts, especially as sets get closer. It's maybe last stock, game 3, and you're sort of thinking like, oh my god, I could actually do this. I could beat Zenodo. And then the moment that your brain goes to that place is mental capacity that you're not using to beat your opponent. And so it's a lot easier said than done to be able to look at yourself in the third person, acknowledge that you're thinking that in that moment and that you need to stop. But it's a practicable skill, and it's even something that you can do in your practice outside of the game. It's just focusing really intensely on one specific component of the game that you can immediately look at and just do. It's not really an abstract thing or a long-winded thing. It's just one small thing that you can pull yourself back into the gameplay with. And then from there, like you were talking about, if you're able to condense it like that, then you can let your experience from that point take you the rest of the way. You're really obviously not expected to be able to think about every individual area that you could be outplaying your opponent in. It's impossible. We relegate a lot of that to our mental stack. But just taking that extra second to recenter yourself and bring yourself back into the mindset of playing Smash will free up even just a little bit more mental capacity to be thinking about the game, and that it's indescribable how far that goes in a high pressure, high stakes environment, especially when your opponent is very likely having the same thoughts that you are in the moment.
Absolutely. I think having that kind of cue to ground yourself in, it's something that's existed forever, probably in anything, actually. But to keep it, Smash Bros. I remember forever ago when I was just like learning Sheik and people were telling me the importance of like, camping with needles, this and that. And, in my mind, I'm like, that doesn't do anything. I don't want to do that. And outside of the use of actually using needles to condition opponents and stuff like that, this is one that I'm sure everyone's heard plenty of times, is that it's good to be able to slow the game down sometimes. Whether it's like staying on the angel platform, shooting a couple needles, retreating to center, some cue that's like a general like, oh, this is a safe spot. This is good. This is, without any context, a good thing to be doing. This is a comfortable spot. And it can just like restart, ground you in the moment, because having that mindfulness, being aware of what's going on, and being able to center yourself is incredibly important. I think that most of the time, when you're playing people and it snowballs out of your head, like you were saying, oh, I'm about to beat Sonoda, oh, this might actually happen, this is working out, it can slip away and it starts rolling. You get hit, you're off stage, and now you can't calmly recenter yourself like you were before. Now you're panicking and you're like, oh man, I need to get back to center, I need to rush. Striking that balance is a difficult thing to do, and it's hard to kind of know yourself and be able to give yourself that many cues. And it's not even just for slowing down. There's things like recognizing when you're agitated, when you're tilted, or when you're playing scared. Things that you see yourself doing, you're like, I shouldn't be run up smashing the Charizard right now. That kind of thing. And having some kind of safe spot to reassess and be like, okay, let me figure out what I need to do, is super key to kind of getting access to all of yourself in that moment. I think that the whole mindfulness part of competing, being aware in the moment, might be the trickiest thing to be on top of, but also the most like game deciding thing to be on top of. You lose yourself for too long, it's over. You could be this pinnacle of a player, beautiful in these areas of the game that you're so competent in, so comfortable in, and that can just disappear. You can turn into like an O-tour for moments at a time, because your mind is no longer where it needs to be. You're in a panic and you don't know what to do anymore. Having something to ground yourself is important, and giving yourself that in preparing for a tournament is one of the best things you could do. Just having some kind of safe spot in that matchup you're going to play. Sometimes it can even be player things, like if somebody's not going to hit you in the corner, they generally play for stage. That's something I'll do when I'll recognize that about somebody, and I'll be like, okay, that's fine, I can just chill here, I can neutral get up and I'll just chill here, I'll figure out what I need to do. Things like that, something that keeps your brain in the game. I think that's what we're really repeating here, what we're really selling home, is that awareness and ability to focus on what's in front of you is key among above all other things. You mentioned the mental stack earlier, and we shouldn't get into a whole explanation of everything about it, but a misconception people have is that top players are just able to keep track of more things than like a low-level player, and that they can just keep 80 things in their head, like actively moving parts. But that's not what's going on. They've just condensed information down to like a the most efficient way for them themselves to process it. And then they know what they want to pay attention to. They stay focused. They stay on top of things. Ultimately, most people can remember about the same amount of thing anyways. So really what you're trying to do is find the things that you want to pay attention to and make sure that your attention is there to give. That you have your own capacity there for Smash Bros. And you're not spending the rest of your mind dilly-dallying on, oh man, if I lose this, I have to play the Link player, and I'm kind of scared of that guy.
Right. And I really, I super agree with what you said about how consequential the mindfulness element of competition is. And what really astounds me is the proportion of like how important and consequential and set deciding and tournament deciding it is relative to how much it's talked about and understood. Because really it is every bit as important to the outcomes of your sets as your actual gameplay is. Which is really, a lot of people will say, you have to have a good mentality. Mentality is half the battle going into a bracket. And that's sort of where it begins and ends for a lot of people's mentality advice. There's a extreme focus on gameplay and what's happening on the screen, so much so that it overshadows what's going on in your head. And so I'm really glad that we were able to discuss that at length, and I'm sure that we will have many more discussions about it, because it's really something that you could just talk about infinitely. I think I have so much that I could say about Smash Bros. Mentality, and I've spent years of my life just like ruminating on the way that I think. So as far as that goes, I think we've talked a lot about the mental side of what looking prepared for bracket actually looks like. And so something I would like to branch into is dealing with circumstances. And so we briefly touched on this earlier, talking about putting the things out of your mind that you can't control and focusing on what you can. And I think it would be helpful for us to talk about what that actually looks like, and enabling yourself to perform the best that you can within your means. And once again, the shining beacon of that embodied is Christian. It's Peanut. I really got to witness it firsthand at Riptide. We spent a lot of time together, and I had breakfast with him, and I remember I was eating some intensely greasy like breakfast sandwich, and I had like a hash brown and stuff, and Christian was eating fruit and yogurt that he bought on the resort. And I asked him if he always ate like that, and he said no. But if I eat well, then that gives me an advantage over every single one of my opponents who doesn't. And if I keep protein bars in my backpack, then I will have an advantage over anyone who doesn't have access to food reliably in the venue. And there's a very funny tweet from Peeb a while ago around that time talking about how he sips water every time his opponent sips water. And that way he ensures that he has a water advantage. And it's silly, obviously, but there really is significant merit to ensuring that you're able to perform at every level, not just within your gameplay, but physically. And what that looks like a lot of times is doing everything in your power to ensure that you are at, sort of tip-top shape going into the bracket, walking down to the venue and playing. And so on a grander scale, that entails a lot of things that may not be practical or feasible for people, like completely readjusting their diets, exercise regularly, things, training your body the way that an athlete would, which is obviously not a realistic expectation for most people who just want to play Smash and do as well as they can within Smash. But there is, I feel like, a much more, in a much more micro sense, a lot of practicable things. And I realized relatively recently, probably only a year ago, that I need to take the initiative on controlling the things that are within my control because, brackets are already random and unpredictable enough, and it is really important to take steps to make sure that you are as ready for it as possible. And so I was curious if you have any like ritualistic behavior or anything like that you feel like helps prepare you just to like literally walk down to the venue, pick up a controller, and play.
Yeah. So, okay, this kind of thing is actually something I've been giving so much more weight to in like the last year or so. One of the biggest things associated with this is like sleep, for example. Uh, Gamers, Smash players, it's a huge thing that they're up till like 5 a.m. and then, oh shit, I have 10 a.m. pools. Oh well. I obviously you can't account for everything, like you said, and circumstances aren't equal, and that's fine. You come to understand that, you know what you are capable of changing and doing something about, and what you're not. I know what it's like to have to go to a tournament. You don't have a lot of money or options to get the most comfortable housing. Maybe you have to sleep on a wooden floor and then drive 40 minutes from the place that you're staying at to the venue.
We have all done that.
It happens. It happens. Dude, people sleep in fucking bathtubs sometimes.
I slept on a
That's
dog
just
bed recently.
Yeah, it's just how it has to be sometimes. So, regardless of your circumstances, it's important to keep your mind on things that you actually have a say in. If you can control your sleeping habits and make sure they align with like a normal schedule that would be for a tournament, I think it's important to do. I've been caring a lot more about what I eat at tournaments, and it feels like even though you can succeed without doing all of these things, because of course you can, it feels better and it gives you more confidence to know that you're doing your part and making an effort in every part of your day for this to work out the best that it can. So when you go to SmashCon, and I did this too, I understand. I literally do it every year. There's a Chick-fil-A right there. I go to SmashCon's Chick-fil-A every day. I'm there, and then I'm at the tournament. I got a rumbling stomach. There's 300 people at the bathroom line. I can't use it. I gotta go play. I don't remember his tag. It was like a shulk. And that's just the condition you put yourself in. Christian, on the other hand, he'll be at SmashCon pulling out the Fig Newton out of this book bag. And he'll be like, okay, we're good. He knows where the secret bathroom is, but besides the point. There actually is one at SmashCon. I think that more than anything, the idea of knowing you are doing your part gives you confidence that in critical moments, you're not thinking about it anymore, and you just believe that you are capable, and then you're doing the best that you can. I think these outside factors matter, and I think that they stack. I think good sleep, good diet, even like self-talk I would attribute to this. Like maintaining like calmness in the environment. Different people have different ways of doing this. Some people need to be warmed up for tournaments, and some people would rather not waste their energy or play when they have a bracket that day. Again, different strokes for different folks, but I think it's important to be like in tune with that kind of thing. Just like everything else, experiment, fill it out a little bit, and do your part to set yourself up the best that you can. I think that in my experience, it helps me when my sleep schedule is actually good enough that I'm not sleeping until 15 minutes before my pool. I definitely have done that a lot where I'll see my pool time and I'll wake up like 35 minutes before, shower, and run downstairs and play. And you feel rushed. Even if you got good sleep because you slept in right until you had to go, now you just woke up, your brain is still getting used to the day, and you feel almost anxious to play. I think giving yourself that time to wake up, maybe get breakfast like 2 hours before you actually have to play, and let your body like settle, helps a lot with feeling clean and in control of yourself. Um, it goes a long way. And the opposite also goes a long way, where you're eating cheesy, greasy, stuff like that right before a tournament, or you're not eating at all. Some people don't touch food the day of tournaments because I guess they're afraid of what it'll do to them. But then they'll find themselves with like no energy, and you're playing a Sonic in your round two, and you just can't play the game that you actually should be prepared to play. That kind of thing. Just all these little factors, like you said, piling up with the other huge amount of things that are not actually in your control. And then you left yourself with the perfect circumstance to throw yourself a pity party and kind of give up and not put yourself into competition mode. The reason that I find Christian so admirable is that he doesn't view himself in any kind of like beautiful, righteous way here. He's not like, oh, this is the Bible's guide on how to play Smash Bros. Or compete. He is earnestly trying to win, and it's not more complicated than that. And this is like he sees it. He's like, this is what is good. I'm going to devote myself to this so that I run out of excuses. I don't have a reason to fall back on for why I didn't perform the way I wanted to, and I will give myself the best shot at performing every tournament that I go to. I will give myself the best chance of improvement and the best chance of victory. I think that doing all that you can, doing your part, makes the biggest difference in the world. It's from a mental to a physical point. I think that it just helps to like back you up.
Right. And it definitely, that something that you mentioned that I didn't touch on was that feeling of confidence and preparedness that comes with taking the little steps. And I really feel like everyone who takes competition seriously, to any extent, should be constantly evaluating what is and isn't working for them, and what are reoccurring themes in events where they didn't feel as prepared as they would have liked to feel, or didn't feel as physically good as they wanted to, and tinker a lot. I think people are very quick to try new things and also very quick to drop things, and I think it takes a long you need a larger body of experimenting with different bracket preps, different rituals, etc., to really understand what is compatible with you. And like you said, there really isn't a static answer to anything when it comes like this. So the best thing that I can encourage people to do is just try. I have done so much over the years. I've competed so often. I have had so many shitty days where I go to a tournament and I just feel awful. I feel unprepared. And I either predictably underperform and feel like shit because of it, or I do what I was supposed to in spite of it. And it's really, in my experience, you're doing a disservice to yourself to not set yourself up to succeed the best you can. Not just because you should go into a competition with the intention of doing as well as you can, but also you're doing a disservice on the other end, where if things don't go your way, you're giving yourself outs, you're giving yourself excuses. And that's a big part of what it is with Peeb, is that, like you said, he's exhausting his list of excuses. He's removing as many barriers between his loss and himself as possible, and that way, whatever the outcome is, it's his, not the adapters at the venue, not that the venue was cold, not that his housemates were up until 3 a.m, not that his controller was broken. And that goes a long way. And I really feel like everyone should put a lot of serious thought into that sort of day of, night before. And that's really something that I've put a lot of emphasis in my own play lately. I have slowly, I made a list on my phone of sort of every time there's something at an event or before the event that is bothering me, upsetting me, making me feel less comfortable than I like to, I note it down and then list solutions. So at Honeypot, the venue was freezing. It was the coldest I've ever been. They had a popcorn vendor who needed to be outside for some reason, and so they literally, in Iowa winter, had a garage door open the whole day into this venue. First time I've ever played in a venue with a literal icy wind. And that was terrible. And so I was pissed, of course. I talked to a TO about it. I was like, does that really need to be open? Like, is that something we got to do? And they were like, yeah, I'm sorry. And I was like, okay, well, as soon as I have exhausted what I can do to control the situation, it's now on me to take steps to do what I can to rectify it. And so I bundled up, I buttoned up my jacket, and borrowed hand warmers from a friend, which are a godsend if you've ever played in a cold venue before. Just these little bags of beads, and they're magic. And I made the most of the circumstances, and I really don't feel like at that event that cold hands or the temperature of the venue affected my play particularly heavily past the set where I noticed it initially. And that feeling of taking a negative circumstance and invalidating it is a significant confidence booster. It feels good to overcome hurdles, and that's why we compete in the first place, because we want to beat the player that whoops our ass. And so I think that really applies to prep. You want to overcome the cold venue and do well in spite of it, and it feels good. So seriously, I really, I can't harp on it enough. That sort of night before, day of ritual, I feel like is something that everyone should put a lot of consideration into. Do you have anything to add to that before we move on?
I think that you said basically anything I'd say. I would just be echoing the same things. Absolving yourself of these things you can't control is important. Anything to get your head in the game. Echoing the most important beats we've already touched on. No, I think I'd just pass it right back.
Sure. Okay, so the last thing that I'd like to touch on before we wrap things up is sort of the aftermath, the wake of the event, making the most of it. And really, I think what I mean by that is not even just strictly like you got your flight home, caught your Uber, and you're laying in bed after the long event. I really think of the aftermath of the event as where your competitive experience ends, where your second loss in that WLM bracket is. From then on, the event is over, in effect. What you came to do has concluded, and at the end of the day, realistically, you're either going to be fine with that result, happy with it, or upset. And I know that this is something that I have struggled with a lot in the past, and I know every competitor has. So I'm curious as to what you would advise to someone to make the most of the event immediately after they're out of the bracket. How to make it a positive experience regardless of the outcome.
I think that also talking about prep is that the way you feel after a bracket is often like significantly attributed to how you felt before the event. That's kind of an important thing. The healthier mindset that you have, the more in tune with yourself that you are, the more grounded you're going to be when the tournament is over. And nobody likes to lose. I'm sure we've all seen it all. People who are super happy, super sad, dejected, people who are just okay with how they are. They accept it. Uh, Emotions are going to hit us all in different phases for different reasons. I think that obviously, if you can put yourself in this learning mindset, having understood what you were capable of, the reasons that you weren't able to clutch it out, you know, just being aware of why things ended up the way that they did, and being able to, take that and go into the next day or so of, friendlies, whatever, money matches, work on things that maybe you were lacking in that tournament. Maybe you can play the people that you lost to, get better insight on the matchups, why they think that they were able to beat you. There's a bunch of resources at these bigger tournaments for you to improve through. But the hardest part about that isn't the actual effort it takes to do that. It's the mindset you need to have to take advantage of the opportunity presented to you. So for me, I've been everywhere on the spectrum there before. I've had tournaments where I lost before I lost. I'm barely playing the game. Uh, Complete strike of apathy, and I lose, and I want nothing less than to be in the venue. I want to get out of there, teleport, be gone. But I can't do that. And it would be ridiculous for me to think that now is the time to play because I just can't. I can't. So I think that provided that's the state that you're in, you're not already set up to just go grind and play, which is just a basic plus. That's obviously going to help you. It's practice. You have a huge sample of like people to play with, matchups to grind, different levels of talent to play against. Bunch of positives there at a major and friendlies, but you need to be capable of actually taking that in and being willing to take advantage of those opportunities. Sometimes you're going to feel pretty bad after you lose a tournament, and it might just be important to give yourself space. A lot of the time, I have tried to force it. Watch sets when I still feel dejected because maybe I can support what I'm watching, maybe get into it, put myself back in the mood. But oftentimes, for me, the best thing for me to do when it is like that is to just go back to like my hotel room if I can. Go to like a more quiet place in the venue. Sometimes you have to walk outside, go to your car, bathroom, whatever, and just feel your negative emotions. Let you just process it. That self-talk that is good to do before a bracket. It's also good to do after. Process the things going on in your mind, clear it up. A lot of the time, especially when it's the severe feelings hitting you, it's not going to go away in 10 minutes. It's going to take a bit. Go get some food with some friends. It's fine. Your goal is to get back to a mindset while you're still at the event where you are capable and eager to learn again. Guiding yourself to the point where you are willing to play the game and take in information and try to do your best. Giving yourself the space to do that and working towards it, as opposed to kind of just finishing the event, saying, "Oh well, it's over. I lost. I have to be here for this amount of time. I'm waiting on this guy to get knocked out." Whatever. If you can maximize the opportunities at the event that you're at, then you should. Uh, it's just a matter of if your brain will work with you.
Right, and that's a really daunting gap to bridge for a lot of people, because it requires not only an understanding of the root of your own frustration, your own negative feelings, but it's also it's almost an admission of defeat in a roundabout sense. It's naturally a very shameful thing to lose for a lot of people, regardless of how logical it is. When you put your all into something and you're putting it all on the line every single time you play a set, and those deep-seated feelings of embarrassment, humiliation, shame that come with losing, regardless of who or to where, are very natural, and you have to be able to acknowledge that and move past it to be able to have productive takeaways from the event. And so there's the actual process you talked about of distancing yourself, separating it from, and just sort of stewing in it and bringing yourself back down to earth the best that you can. Um, but there's also the pre-bracket. The pre-bracket mindset is equally as important. As you said, a lot of that, your feelings and emotions going into the bracket are going to dictate how you feel about it once it's over. And so I think something that I mentioned earlier is especially true here, where disconnecting the individual result or outcome of the bracket, the numerical placement, who you beat and who you lost to, from your perception of a successful or unsuccessful event is a huge step. And it's something that I have really been trying to practice more, when I go with the event with the intentions of competing and whatever happens, happens, as opposed to the intentions of winning. And it's really just important to be proud of yourself and understand how big of a plunge it is to go deep into the thralls of competitive Smash and come out the other side and still go to the next tournament the next day. It's inherently a really admirable, commendable thing for everyone who takes competition seriously. And because of that, really the only time that you've ever actually failed is when you don't get back up and don't keep going. And, you know, sometimes, as much as you can tell yourself something like that, you're going to have that really rough loss, that one that was in your hands and slipped away from you. And, you know, you might have, like, your controller throw a moment, like the breaking point. And that really is just a supernatural thing for even the most upbeat, most positive competitors. The competitors with the highest mental fortitude, I should say. Even Leo, who, you know, the Iron Man tilts. It is a very natural component of playing the game, and even Leo has salt tweeted. And it's just important to understand that regardless of any mental preparation that you can do, when you're doing something as mentally strenuous and intense and self-focused as serious competition in Smash or in anything, that you're going to have those moments where emotion gets the best of you. And it's just important to be able to recognize that not as failure, but just the next step. People really like to say that improvement isn't linear when it comes to gameplay, but it is a mental thing too, where you're going to have highs and lows with the way that you feel about your relationship with the game naturally. And the best thing that you can possibly do is to just acknowledge that. And so if you have that really terrible event, and no matter what you do, what post-bracket rumination and rationalization you do, you just can't get yourself back into it. You can't force yourself to go and play. You can't watch and support your friends. You can't draw anything more positive from the event. The event was still not wasted. You just took the next step in the natural cycle of improving your mental.
Always something to gain.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think we've really touched on everything that I was hoping to talk about. Do you have anything that you would like to circle back to before we stop?
I think that we hit every mark that I would have liked to hit. To summarize, I think that focus, mindfulness is kind of your main ingredient of when you're playing a set. You just need to be focused on the set, and there's different ways to keep yourself grounded, different cues. The hardest parts of preparing for these tournaments and getting around these, how do I make it fit me? How do I know if it's actually doing anything? How do I know that this is worth doing? Getting around all these mental humps is about trusting the process, knowing yourself, communicating with yourself, assessing your feelings on these things, and knowing that at the end of the day, nobody's circumstances are the same, but you will not move if you don't put in the effort. Giving yourself the best chance to succeed is only going to help your confidence, and it's only going to give you these more positive feelings of feedback where it's like, oh, it is rewarding. You know, I am benefiting from this kind of thing. There's all these factors that might not be in your control, but there's also all these factors that you can take control of. These things that you can change and give yourself a better chance at winning, give yourself a better chance at learning, and you get to walk away from the event more satisfied, having retained more, and been closer to what you wanted to be at that event. Uh, I think that it can be tough, but it is important to stay positive because, like you said quite a few times today, you're not really messing up, you're not really failing until you stop trying. It's all about figuring it out and putting that foot forward and trying again, trying again. That's the most important part because you're making progress, you're moving somewhere. It takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is really just like the most important thing that I think either of us could reiterate is you're going to have, that moment post-loss, the first 15 minutes where you're like, oh my God, fuck this. I'm never playing this game ever again. This is terrible. I can't do it. And as long as, that's a completely natural consequence of playing Smash and giving your all and competing in anything. And as long as once you're pulled away from the situation, you're in a more clear headspace, you've had dinner with your friends, you've slept it off, you're woken up the next day, and you feel like you're ready to keep going, and you can understand that it was a rough moment yesterday, but today is a new day, and there's a million tournaments onwards, and that it's not a race, there's no time limit. It's really very abstract and ambiguous avenue of self-improvement. And as long as you're able to recognize that and understand that ultimately any given day is just that, and it doesn't really actually have that much of a significant implication. I don't know why I can't say that word. Implication on you or your career in Smash Bros. And you're good to carry on. Then that's really all you could ask for, right? With that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. I'm pretty happy with what we touched on today. If you like the podcast, I think we're going to be shooting to do this weekly or bi-weekly, relatively frequently, ideally. So make sure to follow the channel. Maybe turn tweet notifications on for the Twitter associated with the podcast. Hopefully we'll have a name by the time this releases.
And if we don't, feel free to recommend some. Right now, the number one contender in my brain is Glazing Peanut.
That's a good one, honestly. I feel like a peanut-centered name would be great for it. Christian really embodies it. And it's so funny, because when I asked Christian if he would think about appearing on an episode of this, he was very lukewarm to it. So we're fans at best. This is parasocial as fuck. So yeah, and also, if you like the sound of our voices, feel free to follow either of us on Twitter. My @ is CXEMDY. Andrew, yours is still Senn Punchy, right?
SENNPUNCHY.
Great. And I think with that, we're going to go ahead and call it. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys.